And so I started to learn how to interact with people in a commerce way that I hadn't had any exposure to before. And I started to realize like people are people. And I started to really get a sense of the humanness, no matter where people were, no matter what the foundation of their culture was. At the end of the day, we're human.
Welcome to the Destinations Podcast. I'm here today with Joe Hyrkin, formerly of Issuu, now a CEO whisperer?
Coach.
I like whisperer.
Whisperer, coach, investor.
He whispers to me. And
advisor and coach. How's that? Advisor and coach.
He's now an advisor and coach. So we're going to talk to him about his cross-cultural background and his 9-figure exit with Issuu and how that cross-cultural background got him to this height of success. I'm really excited for you to see him, meet him, and know him like I do, because he is probably one of the, most unique, most caring, most giving people, most giving CEOs that I have ever met. So without further ado, Hello, Joe.
When I have worked with people like you, it's easy to be caring and giving. It's true. It's true. One of the things that I've always liked in my career is connecting with people who are really passionate about what they're doing. And that's always, I've always thought if I can be involved in a business where we're providing services, tools, software, capabilities for other people who are really passionate about what they're doing, then we're in a good space. And that makes it exciting. And it sort of helps get rid of the monotony or the challenges or the frustrations of running a business day to day.
Well, Cultures on its digital platform uses Issuu, and that is the company that Joe helmed. So tell us a little bit about, let's roll back. Let's talk about how you grew up and your cross-cultural activity in your youth.
All right. I grew up in upstate New York, and I was the only child of parents who spent the 50s and 60s living in Greenwich Village, and they were both artists. My father was a photographer for decades in New York City, and my mother did a lot of hand needlework and painting and those sorts of things. And then when I was born, they moved about an hour and a half out of New York City, and I grew up out in the country, surrounded. My parents bought a little plot of land that was surrounded by 359 degrees by cows and a cow dairy farm. And from the time I was about 6, I started working on that farm. I woke up at 5 a.m. and milked cows.
Wow.
And that was sort of my start. But they were always very interested in Eastern philosophies. And so I grew up involved in meditation and Eastern philosophies and things like that. I met the Dalai Lama when I was 8.
Which blows my mind.
And I still remember it. It was in a monastery in New Jersey. And then in the late 70s and 80s, we got involved with a meditation organization. I went to a traditional public school, and sort of, went through middle school and high school in that way. But I always had this part of my life that was sort of esoteric and philosophical. So I went to India for the first time when I was 16. I'd barely traveled before that. I'd been to Chicago when I was like 3. And then when I went to college, I studied Chinese and political science, which was pretty unusual for the time. It was late 80s. And I had this sense that, one, I wanted to get out of upstate New York. And China was about as far as I could go. So that was part of it. But also I had this sense that China was really big. They were increasingly important. And there would be, if I could start to understand China and Chinese, I'd be able to play an interesting role in whatever kind of was happening between the U.S. and China, and the globe, and the world and China. And that's about as far as I got when I was 18. I liked the idea of, I'd read about Marco Polo, and I liked the idea of all these travel stories and kind of the mystery of travel and getting out and seeing new cultures. So I went to college, and I picked a major in Chinese and political science without really knowing a whole lot about China. And then I spent my junior year studying in Beijing and traveling all over China. It was 1990, so it was a year after Tiananmen Square.
Yeah.
And I
was
lived
in Germany then. I remember when that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you were in Germany, and there was this fascinating time in the world, right? Cold War was ending, the wall came down, Tiananmen Square. After Tiananmen Square, China was reopening. Even with the crackdown on Tiananmen Square, even the fact that it happened represented a whole new age in China.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to be happening all over the world, and that's pretty unusual. Like to be to actually be in the middle of a massive cultural shift in the place where it's happening.
Yes. Because the wall had just come down in Germany.
Yeah.
So as you say, all over, there was so much change happening.
Yeah.
And yes, Tiananmen Square was it was like a next step. That's what it felt like from where I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the university that I went to in Beijing was sort of the number 2 headquarters for Tiananmen Square. And I got to know students who had been on the square and watched things unfold. When I got there, China was just reopening back up. I was part of the first cohort of students American students that went back to China. I think there were more American students in China in 1990 than there are today.
Really?
Yeah, which is shocking. There are less than 1,000 American students in all of China right now.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think during COVID, everything got shut down, and post-COVID, American institutions have been hesitant to send students back to China. I think partly because of the relationship between the U.S. and China, and partly maybe that the Chinese haven't been as open. I'm not totally sure, but I think it's bad for the future of U.S.-China relations. I think we're losing a whole generation of people who understand the culture and understand what's going on over there.
Right.
So I finished up my degree. I went to SUNY Albany, State University of New York at Albany, and then moved to Hong Kong. And I knew a couple of people in Hong Kong. I was going to go to law school, so I got into a few law schools. I knew a couple of people in Hong Kong. One of them said, I have a house on a far-off island, but you can take a boat. It takes an hour to get into Hong Kong. This is the main part of the city, but you can stay there until you find a place. And I had another person who said, well, I'll make introductions for you. I'll help you out.
Wow.
And I landed in Hong Kong. I spoke Chinese, but in Hong Kong, everyone in those days spoke Cantonese or English. I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about business. I had studied the language and politics. But during my year, if we back up a little bit, during that year of 1990-91, I grew up. I traveled all over China. I lived in this foreign student dormitory. They wouldn't let us live with the Chinese. But I was surrounded by people from Japan and all over Europe and Africa. And so I got this, in the middle of Beijing, China, I got this exposure to people from around the globe that was amazing. Different kinds of food, different languages, different accents. And we were all there to study Chinese. So, and we were all there, if you studied Chinese in 1990, you had kind of a explorer sense, and you were looking to do something outside the norm in a lot of ways. So it was a super interesting group of people. I'm still friends with some of them, and we traveled. We traveled all over China by train. Different groups of us. We went to some places that were just opening up for foreign students to come visit, towns that like foreign students hadn't been there before. So I got into arguments, I negotiated, I learned how to really speak Chinese. I got into trouble. I mean, so many things happened
What kind
in
of
the
trouble
course
did you get into?
Oh,
Here's
so
something I haven't heard before.
so because China was just opening up, they weren't totally sure how to deal with foreigners. So we would do things, like I didn't actually do this, but a friend of mine, we were at a club dancing one night. We needed to get a cab home. Taxi driver wouldn't take us, and so there was another taxi, and my friend actually just got it in and started driving, and we were just waiting to see like what would happen. But things like that, and like the Chinese authorities were just sort of like not sure what to do with these people. He left the car a couple blocks later, but we went to more of the trouble was like there's a few things I'm not going to put on camera, but we'll talk about it over lunch. But there were in those days there were two currencies. There was renminbi, which were used by Chinese, and then there was FEC, foreign exchange currency, that were used by foreigners. And as a student, we were allowed to use the renminbi, but it was always complicated because I'd go to a train station and I'd try to use renminbi, and they would, because I was a foreigner, they only wanted to take my foreign exchange currency.
Okay.
Constant arguments. They're like, we can't take your foreign currency. Well, I have a special pass that enables me to use renminbi. Well, you can't use renminbi because you're not Chinese. Like there's a whole, like constantly. Or we would go to hotels or guest houses that were only allocated for Chinese, but because we were students, we tried to stay. And there was constantly convincing and arguing, and because of course the places where foreigners could stay were much more expensive, and the students, we didn't have any money. We would buy fake DVDs. There was a place called the Silk Market, it doesn't exist anymore, in Beijing, that was right outside the U.S. Embassy. And the whole place was selling fake goods, DVDs, clothes, all that sort of stuff. So we would buy clothes and things there.
Wow.
So anyway, I'm saving some of the better stories. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about negotiation. I learned a lot about in China, in the markets, as is a lot of places outside of the United States, there's bargaining is accepted in almost a sport. And I did a lot of that. And one of the things that it taught me, I think a lot of my business skill and business acumen was formed in the streets of China, on the trains of China, traveling all over, because everything was up for negotiation. What you paid for things was up for negotiation. Where we could stay was up for negotiation. And so I started to learn how to interact with people in a commerce way that I hadn't had any exposure to before. And I started to realize like people are people. And I started to really get a sense of the humanness, no matter where people were, no matter what the foundation of their culture was. At the end of the day, we're human. And that, in engaging in that in transactions, it became fun. Like just bargaining for a coat. If we really just sort of connected with each other and had fun with it, it could be. So I sort of learned a lot about how to interact with people around currency and around commerce.
So do you think that translated? I mean, my experience with China, I mean, I've been to China 6 times. But my favorite experience, which I loved every time, but my favorite experiences are in Spanish school in Madrid and Valencia. My Chinese counterparts, and I don't know if it's because you're in a similar situation. For some reason, they had an affinity for me. I have no idea why, but Yeah, they were just fascinated, and it was a great place to be. For some reason, they thought we connected on a certain level. So thinking of that culture, how do you think, or how far do you think it connected for you to use those skills you learned in Chinese culture to then translate them to American culture?
I I studied travel in Beijing for a year in 1991. Then I lived in Hong Kong from 92 to 97, and then back in Beijing 97, 98. So I spent basically the 90s
Okay.
living in Hong Kong or Beijing. I don't really think of it as what I learned in the Chinese culture and then translate to the American culture.
You just learned about people.
I just learned about people, and I just learned about connecting, and I learned about taking risks, and I learned about how to talk my way out of the ramifications of taking
The art of
risks.
persuasion.
But for real, and I learned about, particularly because I was living with all these people from different cultures, I learned about people have their own culture, but then how elastic it can be. We think of, I remember when I was planning to go to China to study. This was pre-internet. It was pre-everything, right? There was, to call my parents, we'd have to make an appointment with the telephone booth operator, right? All of our interactions were listened to. If my parents called me on a Sunday night just to talk about the weather and what was happening at home, we could hear the operators eating while they were listening to our phone calls.
No way.
Pre-AI, right? I don't know.
Wow.
They probably were listening for particular words for our safety, of course. So it was more about. So when I went, I had this idea: I'm going to go to China, and I'm going to be Chinese for a year. And I got there, and it was really clear, like, I was not going to be Chinese for a year. Even though I'd gotten good grades in Chinese class in the U.S., I studied Chinese for 2 years, pretty intensely. I could barely speak the language when I landed. In fact, when I got to Beijing, I landed by myself. The way it worked back then, it would never work this way anymore, right? So I got a ticket. I flew from New York to Hong Kong via Seoul. I spent a couple days by myself in Hong Kong, and then I took a flight from Hong Kong to Beijing, and I landed totally by myself. Nobody from the university was there to pick me up. I was on my own. And I had my bags, and I had a bunch of, one of my friends who had been to China before said, bring a bunch of stuff, like things to give away, like pencils and pens and stickers. And so I had a bunch of that. And I got out of the airport. I found the taxi line. I got in the taxi, and I told him exactly where I wanted to go because I knew how to say my university in Chinese, and I knew the address. And he looked at me, and he had no idea what I said. There's nothing to look up. There was no phone. I didn't have a map. There was nothing. And I'm by myself. It's like 8 o'clock at night. And in those days, Beijing airport was, I don't know, about 45 minutes or an hour from my university. Still old roads. There were mule-drawn carriages sort of next to the cars. And I panicked. And I'm like, okay, what do I do?
So
this was the beginning of this year where it was constantly like this. I was constantly in these situations where I'd never been before, wasn't sure what to do, and I just had to think.
How amazing. How amazing. I think that's, having taught at university, I think that's the biggest thing that we don't do well these days is the critical thinking. Yeah.
I like to think about it as synthesis, like really being able to connect dots and start to think, use what information is available to us to move forward. So these are the kinds of things I think when I think of business, that moment in the taxi cab when I first landed in Beijing, critical to my education. So I sat there. I kept trying to say the name. He kept not understanding me. He was getting frustrated because
I
he's
could
got
totally,
this.
I could totally see it because Chinese, well, I guess all languages, but to me, Chinese specifically, it's just a little lilt of part of a word that changes.
Well, it's tones. There's 4 tones for every
Yeah.
sound, right? And what happens often in China, at least back then, even now, if they see a foreigner, they assume that the foreigner can't speak Chinese, so they don't hear you.
Mm.
One of the things that I learned in my time in China, before I would do anything, I didn't do this in the taxi at the time, but I learned later on, I would actually ask them if they speak Chinese. And then they would hear me speak. I would say, 你会说普通话吗? And they would, that means, can you speak Chinese? And they would kick into gear, like, oh, I could talk to this guy in Chinese, right? Anyway, so I'm sitting in the back of the taxi, and I remembered that I had actually written down the address on a slip of paper, and I rummaged through my things. I found the paper. I gave it to him. He figured out where to go. I got to the university, and I was one of the first foreign students to arrive. People were arriving over the course of the next week. And I got to the foreign student dorm. There was a security guard. There were security guards everywhere.
Mm.
They've now been enhanced by cameras everywhere in China, in Beijing in particular. I could barely understand anything the guy said as he was welcoming me. I understood 2 things. The hot water shut off at 8 p.m. and the cafeteria closed at night at 8:30. It was 8:45. So I couldn't get anything to eat, and I couldn't take a hot shower. Welcome to Beijing. So again, it was a year of being in these situations where I had to compromise, I had to navigate, I had to start synthesizing, had to put pieces together so I could survive. And the first few weeks were a struggle, and then it was a magical year. I mean, I again traveled, I met people, I learned, I argued, I navigated, all sorts of things. So
I think that sounds, magical, I think is the word. That sounds fascinating to me. I think, I have some friends who are travelers, which travelers are different than cross-cultural people or TCAs. And I have one in particular who'll say, oh, I always worry about you when you travel. Really? Because I've been doing this for many decades. And I think often when you're with people who travel, especially if they plan, they want things to be a certain way, they want to know what's happening. I just free wing it.
Yeah.
Is that a word? Free wing it. And
Well,
it's really
I
about
call
the
it-
discovery.
yeah, it's a Lonely Planet way of traveling.
Yeah.
Right. Discovery is like, that's, again, if you look at the core elements to be successful in business, discovery is critical. You have to constantly be in a space of discovering what's next, discovering what's great about this product, discovering what the market needs, discovering what the market is telling me about what I should be doing in my business. So that's a huge piece. I think the second, if we talk about it through the lens of the Lonely Planet traveler, right? And I think the Lonely Planet traveler in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, pre-internet, was a particular kind of adventurer, right? We were willing to take that book that someone else had written about countries we've never been to before, and we're willing to say, okay, the directions to this really cool place are take a right, go 100 yards, and take a left. And you're like, okay. And sometimes the cafe was there, right? And so that openness to discovery, that willingness to not know. And I think every business, you can have, every business has plans. Every business has strategies. We spend a lot of time working on roadmaps and all these things. And in my coaching business now, I work with CEOs to help them minimize the distractions for themselves and their team. And I think many CEOs, people who are running businesses, I think it's common on a Sunday night, sit down and write down the key priorities for the week or the month. And I think you're pretty lucky if that Sunday night list of priorities lasts until 7 a.m. on Monday. Things happen all the time. We're surprised by people around us, good and bad. We're surprised by, sometimes you have a nice revenue spike over a period of a month, and that changes what the priorities become. Sometimes it's negative. That changes. And it's not about reactive. It's about being responsive. It's about engaging the information that's available and using that to keep moving forward. Right. And again, I never got an MBA. I never ended up getting that law degree. But I traveled around China in 1990, and
that was your education.
And I come back to that time and time again. The challenges and the excitement and the I often think of myself as being a baby with a 20-year-old mind. Mm-hmm. And, I was able to, I had no awareness about what was happening, but everything was new. Yeah. There wasn't one thing I did that year that was not brand new when I did it.
Well, so how did you translate from that? Because so far, even in your youth, like your younger years, everything seems cross-cultural. And then how did you translate that to Silicon Valley all of a sudden? Because that's really the crux of your career.
Yeah. My first job in Hong Kong was with this little company doing investment deals in northern China. I was 22. Very long story, but 9 months into my tenure, it was formed by a guy who had started the first Chinese foreign joint venture to be publicly listed in Shenzhen, the first stock market in China. He ran into trouble with the local authorities. 9 months into my tenure working for him in Hong Kong, he was abducted and thrown into jail in Shenzhen, which is right across the border. And it became my job to help get Jimmy Pang out of jail. And he was an Australian citizen, so I worked with the Australian consulate.
Oh, wow.
And the American consulate because the Americans were interested in his case. And again, I didn't know anything. And I mention this because in so many of my jobs, I didn't know how to do the specifics of what I was being tasked with. I had to rely on experiences that I had prior in my life that I could then apply. This notion of synthesis is a key theme in my career. So I worked on that, tried to get him out of jail. He ended up getting out of jail 6 years later, but
6 years.
Yeah.
How long did you work on it?
I worked on it for about 9 months, and then the company ran out of money, and I had to go find my next job.
6 years.
Yeah. Became a international case and an international finance case and all kinds of interesting things. So then I went to work for the Economist group, a big information and magazine company. And the Economist at the time, still does, had an organization called the EIU, Economist Intelligence Unit, that provided data, information, research, content for senior executives of multinationals operating in emerging markets. And then a pretty big business in Hong Kong that focused on China and Asia. And I was hired to get involved in the China business. So I opened up their first office in Beijing, moved back to Beijing to run that. And this is the late 90s. A lot of people I knew were getting into technology. I wanted to pursue that aspect. The Economist actually did a lot in technology, but I wanted to sort of get into the .com world. I had a few offers, and the job I ended up taking brought me back to Silicon Valley, where I was the first salesperson for a company called Sina.com, which was made up of 35 people from Taiwan and me. And I was the first sales guy. So I was able to parlay my China experience into the internet world. I learned a ton. They went through 3 CEOs in 6 months, which is not, as I learned, was not that unusual in a Silicon Valley startup in times of challenge. And I started to realize this company was probably going to start to move its headquarters back to China. I just moved back from China to the U.S. I wanted to stay in the U.S. at least a little while. And then from there, I moved to a company called Vrage, and we did software for publishing, managing video content. And I was there for about 4 years. We took that company public. I was on the management team that took it public. And again, I didn't know anything about video on the internet, but what we were trying to do was create, the acronym didn't even exist back then, but we were creating a SaaS platform to provide tools for video content owners to make their videos searchable and accessible online. This was early. This was late 90s, early 2000s. So what I did know was I knew grit. I knew, like, we're just going to roll up my sleeves and we're going to go meet people and go talk to people in the industry and convince them that we had a set of tools that would enable them to get their video available online. And we had software that we'd built, but we hadn't really finished the software for the purpose of SaaS. So I went and met with people from ABC and CNN and all the owned and operated TV stations and all the sports leagues and all of the movie folks and TV folks, and we would just go on meetings and trips. And the first deal we did, at the time we sold software to big media folks that they would put on their own servers and manage, and we thought, well, we'll manage it for you as a second part of the business. We called it Vrage Interactive at the time. And the first deal we did was with World News Tonight, where we did a deal where we would take Peter Jennings' World News Tonight and put it on the internet by the next morning in a searchable format.
Okay.
Using our extremely sophisticated software to do it.
Uh-oh.
And here's how our sophisticated software worked. We had someone in the company who would be home by 7 p.m. every night. He would take a VCR cassette and put it into his VCR and record World News Tonight and take that cassette and bring it back into the office the next morning by 7 a.m. We would encode it, chop it up, and make it available as searchable video on ABC World News Tonight's website.
Wow.
Within a year, we had really developed software, and we were doing that for dozens of major media companies, including Major League Baseball, where we created this product where within about an hour of every game ending, people could search for any aspect of the game and they create their own clips and things like that. This was sort of Silicon Valley speed. This is the excitement here, right? Where within a year we'd taken this very manual process and turned it into, we went public within a year of launching Vrage Interactive, and we were serving a big number of sports leagues and major media entertainment companies with real products. We rented out a satellite facility, and we're doing really interesting, cutting-edge things. So again, it was one of these experiences where when I look back on it, I often think about those years in Asia, the traveling. So throughout the rest of my career, I've never been China-specific in the ways I was in the 90s. But those challenges and those opportunities and navigating through buying, jackets and shirts in Silk Alley and navigating landing in places in China, having no idea where to go or what to do, served me well, I think, throughout. I borrow that. And I think, again, one of the key themes for being successful in the business world is recognizing that when we're in the midst of a challenge, because there's always a challenge, we have two choices. We can focus on the fact that we've never done this before and not know what to do, or we can focus on we have experiences that can lend themselves to how we navigate through this particular challenge and situation. I think about as people, we don't give ourselves enough credit for the resilience that we have experienced throughout our entire lives. Our lives are one example of resilience after the next, no matter who we are, where we are, what we're doing. You think about just from the time we're born, as soon as a baby is born, they've never eaten outside of the womb. They and the parent figure that out. They often say when a baby's learning to walk, they're always falling down. It's part of the process, right? And so I think we have this resiliency built into us as human beings. And when it comes to business, we have that same resilience that's been available to us that we can start to apply as we're moving forward. Anyway, so then I spent the next 25 years in Silicon Valley. We took Vrage public. We did very well. Then the crash happened and we did very poorly. We ended up selling the company for a very small amount of money to a company called Autonomy, which 10 years later was acquired by HP for $10 billion. And the CEO of Autonomy was arrested for fraud, ended up getting out of, he ended up being declared innocent, but then died in a boating accident within a week of coming into that. That was very recently, actually. That whole wow. I went to Yahoo. After Vrage, I went to Yahoo. I ran the business side of things for Flickr and multimedia search. So I was at Yahoo when Terry Semel, the previous Warner Brothers CEO, was running Yahoo. And Yahoo was in the midst of figuring out how much they embrace Web 2.0.
Okay.
So acquired Flickr. I worked with the guy who became the founder of Slack, who was the founder of Flickr. And we worked together closely on the Flickr business. And I got involved in multimedia search at Yahoo, which was in the early days. This was pre-YouTube. In fact, I remember sitting down with a friend in the cafeteria as we were looking at potential companies to buy. And he mentioned, there's some new company, MeTV or YouTube something, and it was YouTube. So I've been at the forefront of a lot of the innovations that we've seen that are now totally mainstream and household names, and either been in the middle of them or being in the middle of the technology that ultimately led to other companies becoming dominant players. Then I, from Yahoo, I went to a company called Gaia Online, which was Avatar.
Gaia, the like spiritual people?
No, Gaia Online was an avatar-based social
Online.
gaming company, different than the spiritual folks. And we innovated and went and figured out how to take, it was basically a website where people had their own avatar and could dress them up in any way they want and get virtual goods and virtual products for their avatar. And then message board forum where they communicated. Again, this was mid-2000s. And we turned this into a virtual world and we would do these really cool, innovative ad programs with movies and interesting content. So we did this really cool campaign with the Bee Movie that Paramount came out with in maybe 2007 or 8. And as part of their sponsorship, instead of just banners, which most people were doing back then, we created a whole set of products, virtual good products related to the Bee Movie, and we created games and stuff so that the users would go engage with those products. So it became fun. It was like adding to the experience on the site and giving the advertiser context in the world in that experience. We did that with a whole range of different really interesting brands. And we built Gaia to a really top internet property. And then there were a few other companies around at the time doing things in the virtual world space. Second Life was one, still going. There was the early stage of social media. Meebo was very popular, and there was this little company called Facebook that was about our size back in 2007. And Facebook did some very interesting things where they actually opened up their platform for other people to develop products that would be experienced in Facebook. And there was this moment in time where content creators, content sites like Gaia had to make a choice. Do we just focus on Gaia as being the destination, or do we start to create content for other platforms like Facebook? Those folks like Zynga, who built their entire business on distribution in Facebook, were hugely successful. In the case of Gaia, we ended up deciding to stay centric to Gaia, and Gaia is still around, but never had the growth that we saw, that others saw. And interestingly, I think in the world of AI right now, we're in a similar situation. So we have these huge LLMs, large language models, that power things like ChatGPT. So OpenAI owns these huge LLMs, and we have companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, and others, and then a whole bunch of companies building applications on top of other people's LLMs. So there's this situation: will the big LLMs act like Facebook and open up their platform for others to benefit from their data, or will they start to compete with those companies who are opening up their platform for data? So one of the things that we start to see over the years in the technology world is history keeps repeating itself around how businesses will evolve and grow. From Gaia, I worked for a venture capital firm, and then called Trinity Ventures, and then I jumped into being a CEO. So my first company was a company called SingleFeed, where I took over as CEO for a previous leader, and I helped sell that company to Alibaba, big Chinese company. So China keeps coming back in, Asia keeps coming back in. Then I ran a company called Wordnik, which was just too early, but it was a company that was trying to understand the meaning of words based on the other words around each particular word. Back then, the technology didn't exist to really facilitate that, but essentially it was the early stages of AI, right? Because AI is all about that synthesis of information and providing it in meaningful ways. And shortly after I left Wordnik, I got recruited and told about this company called Issuu. And I was told, has a big footprint. It's got publications and interesting content. It's in Europe. You're here. But it was fascinating to me. And as I dug more into Issuu, which started in Denmark, and they were looking for a CEO to really focus on international expansion and growth and partnerships in Silicon Valley, I realized that it had everything that I'd spent my career doing. It was about content. It was about tools and services for people who were creating content for which they had great passion. It was international, and it was about making content available to people all over the world. And so I joined Issuu in 2013. We flipped it to be a U.S. company, and I got to work with people like you and millions of others. We had about every year about 1 million businesses, from individual solopreneurs to huge companies, everybody in between, education, government, magazines, and internal documentation and marketing materials and brochures and catalogs, used Issuu for hosting their content and then transforming it into different assets and getting access to a whole set of data and analytics. And when I got to Issuu, we were very much a siloed business. We really focused on, this is the tool that we make available. And one of the key things that we spent time focusing on was, how do our users use our technology in association with the other products that they're using? Particularly in the software world right now, nobody uses only one product. You use products like you with Adobe, in case of Issuu, Adobe, HubSpot, Issuu, Shopify, various others. And so we started to look at how do we integrate with these different products.
Wait, you can integrate Issuu with Shopify?
There are ways to. We didn't have an official integration, but there are ways to integrate with Shopify. Yeah. So we really made sure that we were embeddable and could be used in association with other products. And we grew it so we had over 1 million folks a year using us, 100 million uniques a month consuming that content. We had users in almost every country, in all corners of the globe, and then we got acquired in July of last year.
July of last year. I'll
Yeah.
never forget that. Wait, I was in Portugal. No, in June.
You were in Portugal.
I was
in
at
June.
your
Yeah.
headquarters, not your headquarters, but in Braga. In June.
We had a big office in Braga, Portugal. So
Yeah.
we had offices in Berlin, Copenhagen, Portugal, and then we had people spread around the U.S.
We had to sit down like this.
We did, but I interviewed you that time.
But it was great because I didn't expect it to be for all the offices. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, we simulcast. Again, these are some of the things that didn't exist. COVID forced us to operate and engage in different ways, and as frustrating and challenging as it was in the moment, we now have a whole set of ways of interacting that weren't acceptable before or weren't common practice before, and now there's ranges of efficiency, and I think sometimes people take advantage of those things, but I think in most cases it's given us new tools.
Agreed. Well, it's interesting. In a brick and mortar sense, I've been contemplating why some businesses, let's say restaurants, that were thriving before COVID. But I shouldn't say just those businesses. Let's use the restaurant example. However, let's say whole communities, like a place that has a lot of businesses, and all of them used to thrive. It used to be bustling and busy, and post-COVID, it is dead. You don't even know how any of these businesses stay in business. But one brick and mortar has a line out the door.
Yeah.
Like, do you have? I mean, I know you were in the tech world, but do you have an idea as to
why? So I'm
why?
fascinated by that. I love looking at where the Issuu office used to be in Palo Alto.
Mm-hmm.
It's on a street with different restaurants, and a lot of these spaces have hosted multiple businesses. They're like in the last 15 years, a lot of them have had 3, 4, 5 businesses. Mm-hmm. Right next door to us is this tiny little Indian restaurant that is thriving and has always thrived. And they figured out how to thrive through COVID. And again, it comes back to this idea we were talking about around resiliency. So those businesses that recognize that resiliency is inherent within us will figure out how to engage it. And they'll be comfortable in the discomfort. A little bit of an aside, I was once raising money for venture capital firms for one of the companies I was running, and we were raising $10 million. And one of the investors said, "Why do you need 10? How much do you really need?" And I said, "Well, we need 7 to 8 to execute on our plan." He said, "Then why are you raising 10? I said, "Well, it'd be good to have a little extra comfort in case things don't go as planned." And he looked at me and he said, "Joe, we are not in the comfort business." And those businesses that continue to thrive when others around them aren't, understand they're not in the comfort business. They understand that in challenging times, they have to be creative, they have to be resilient, they have to go figure out how to engage. And it's responsive. They have to be responsive to what's happening, right? So they figured out how to quickly have their, get their food delivered. They figured out how to put it into the right kinds of containers. They figured out how to leverage 10 different delivery services. Whatever it is, they figured out how to talk about themselves in ways that were relevant for the time. They weren't sitting there thinking, "Oh, I wish it was like 2019. They were present to the moment, and they leveraged information that was available to them throughout the market. They understood their community. They understood ways to get their product out and how to communicate about their product in ways that are different than a year ago. And I think that's, again, if you look really at any business that's successful, that's what they're doing. They're present to what's happening now. They're responsive to it, not reactive. Right? Reactive is, I'm just going to do something quickly because I saw something or I heard something or someone asked me a question. Responsive is, I'm taking in the information. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to slow everything down, but it means I'm hearing what customers are saying. I'm hearing what my employees are saying. I'm hearing what's happening in the market and making decisions based on that. Doesn't mean you're going to please everybody, but it means you're using as much information beyond just the surface words that
To make decisions.
that become available to make decisions. And then you have to be comfortable with the discomfort, right? So we're constantly making decisions in business where we don't have as much information as we'd like, or we don't have as much time as we'd like. I don't care how big a company is. People always want more resources. They want more people. They want more investment. They want more customers. There's always, you can live in the space of I need more, or you can live in the space of we're going to figure out and navigate through the challenges. And I think that's, I don't know how many of these small businesses that you think about that have somehow thrived through challenges while many around them haven't. If they really thought about it, I think they would have a similar answer. Or at least what they tell you they did. If they said, we did these 5 things, it'll be 5 different things than the other businesses around them tried. Or it'll be 5 different ways to go about it.
I love that. I could listen to your wisdom all day. I'm going to close with a question. Well, all of these are questions, but I'm going to close with, if you could give 3 tips to an entrepreneur on how to translate their unique, I guess I could say their unique cultural cachet, but their unique abilities into a successful business, what would your 3 tips be?
You know, at Issuu, we had 3 key components of our culture, and I think the tips would revolve around these 3. Care, grit, learning. In fact, my coaching business is called Care, Grit, Learning, LLC. So care incorporates caring about the people with whom you're working, care about your customers, care about the impact that your product has on their customers. It's a roadmap, it's a funnel of care that is incorporated into the human beings that we're interacting with, whether they're working for us or consuming the aspect of the product that we're making available. The second is grit. We are not in the comfort business. We are in the transformation business. We are in the offering value business. And that comes with a huge number of challenges. You know, in December of 2019, if you asked any CEO to list their top 50 priorities, they shouldn't have 50, but if you said list your top 50 priorities that you're going to focus on in 2020, not one would have said, I'm going to focus on how to navigate through a global pandemic. And yet 3 months later, every CEO is trying to figure that out. And so grit is a huge component. Just keep going. And it's not banging your head against the wall. It's challenge each other, your team, yourself, to be creative. Understand, is the product that I have, is it valuable? Is it useful? And if it is, there are ways to get it available to a market that's significant. And as challenges come up, have the attitude of grit. I am going to keep moving towards the goals that we have set forward. And be in a place to make adjustments. So grit also incorporates flexibility. It's not just hardcore banging your head against the wall. It's flexibly responsive to the information that you're getting. And then learning. It's not just about learning the information, but it's about how we apply it. So it's great to learn. It's really important to take what we've learned and then do something with it. So it's not just book knowledge, it's about how do we then apply it to what we're doing. So for instance, it's not enough to just learn that our prices are too expensive. We have to then go test out what are the right prices, as an example, right? So a lot of people will say, well, we're too expensive, we'll then change the price. It's not just changing the price, it may not actually be too expensive. What you may be is not effective at communicating the value you're delivering for that price. It may be that there may be one element, one feature that needs to be incorporated at the price you're delivering that makes a radical shift. So it's about learning something and then really applying that and continuing. And then it's just a cycle. If you are applying it, demonstrates care. If you go figure out it's not just about the price, but it's about some other aspect, incorporates grit. So this cycle of care, grit, and learning always being a core tenet of how you run and operate a business.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate your time. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to share?
I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
To our audience, I want you to really dig into this episode and listen to the wisdom that Joe has imparted. I find that it's very helpful on a day-to-day basis, whether you're an entrepreneur, if you're a fellow CEO. And we look forward to hearing what you think about his thoughts and to hearing how you explore your cultural passions. Thanks for being part of the Destinations Podcast family. We're so glad you're here, and you can help us grow as well. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, whether you're listening or watching. And make sure that we bring you content that helps you not only be truly, authentically you, but helps you embrace your cultural passions.